Hi, welcome to Medhealthfit. I'm Eric Durack and welcome to the show. In this edition, in our ongoing series on cancer wellness, tonight's episode is on cancer prevention. And the title of the show is called Real Methods to Achieve Cancer Prevention, both within yourself and at home. And cancer prevention is probably the most important area of cancer knowledge that most people don't really know about. So in our episode tonight, we're going to talk about things that you can do for yourself and things that you can do and have control over in your house that can actually achieve a higher incidence rate of cancer prevention than you might otherwise think. So let's go to our first slide here. The folks who are in medicine, the epidemiologists and the oncology folks, when they describe what's called primary prevention, it's the reduction of occurrence of a particular disease, and that can be both in a particular person or in a whole population. So when people look at things like malaria and other types of big epidemics, they'll look at, well, how can we reduce the incidence of disease in a whole population? So that's why they study it. The second thing that we want to look at is how do we reduce the occurrence of a disease in the real world? How can you actually take control over your own methods of reducing a disease? Like I say, both within yourself and in something like your home or at your office setting or whatever. And so what we're going to do in this segment is we're going to look at some real world applications and how they can actually apply to your everyday cancer prevention. All right. So let's look at the first one. Let's jump right in there. Probably the biggest thing that people can make a change in is in their diet. And one of the things that they can change in their diet on a daily basis is to reduce the amount of processed foods. Because processed foods, for the most part, are mostly sugars and carbohydrates. And those two products per se do nothing to enhance your body's ability to improve its energy function or to help you in any other way. They're basically there to put just a certain amount of calories in the system. So if you can look at the types of foods that you eat in the morning, such as boxes of breakfast cereal versus eggs or oatmeal or another type of grain cereal that you cook for yourself, and you look and see what you have for lunch, whether you're eating chips or something of that nature, or at dinner, are you having mostly processed foods, or are you making food yourself? If you can actually identify the types of processed foods that you're eating every day, and you can reduce those, you'd be very surprised how the incidence of cancer prevention is actually going to improve for yourself. So let's look at the second thing. The second thing is very important from a physiology standpoint, and I want to stay on this slide here for a second. When you control the amount of carbohydrates, whether they're processed or not in the system, you're actually controlling both your insulin levels and your leptin hormone levels. And this is monitored by very inexpensive tests. So let's explain what insulin is. And here we have a bottle of insulin that a person with diabetes would probably take as an injection every day. So both insulin and leptin are hormones that regulate metabolism. Most people are familiar with insulin because they know that's what diabetic folks take. Leptin is actually a hormone that regulates metabolism and is actually stored in white fat. So the higher the amount of leptin, the worse off your fat is, and the higher your fat levels are, the worse your leptin is. So both these hormones, leptin and insulin, need to be controlled on a daily basis, and the best way to control those, the rise of both of those hormones, is through diet. What you eat, the amount of carbohydrates that you eat versus fats and protein, and how they're digested and assimilated in the body. So that's a key factor. So if you want to impress your doctor and say, hey, I want to get on a diet that will regulate my insulin levels and keep them low, your doctor's going to know that you've done some homework in terms of what's the physiology behind not just preventing diseases like diabetes, but preventing cancer, reducing the risk of getting cancer. So our next slide is to avoid eating excess protein. Now, we know that if you have higher amounts of protein, you can reduce the amount of insulin that you're producing. But if you have too much protein, it also increases your risk for cancer. So when I was in college and I studied nutrition, Most of the textbooks of the day said that a normal person would probably take about 0.6 to 1 gram of protein for every kilogram of body weight. So I'm about 65 kilograms, 170 pounds. I probably need about 55 to 65 grams of protein every day. So in the morning I take a little protein powder because I want to make sure my insulin levels are low. And usually at lunch or dinner I will have protein, a piece of chicken or a tuna fish or something of that nature that allows me to get up to about 1 gram of protein, but I know that I don't want to have too much protein because physiologically it taxes the liver and the kidneys, your filtration system, and excess protein is converted to fat, which may affect your insulin and leptin levels, but also too much protein, especially too much cooked protein in the form of meats, also increases your risk for getting cancer. So you need to look at the types of proteins that you eat and the total amount of protein that you eat every day. So what's the next thing that you can do? Well, since we're on the topic of meats, you might want to look at avoiding specific types of meats. And the first one that I have here on the slide is avoiding farmed salmon. So you want to be very careful as to where you get your salmon, just because of the nitrates and that have been leaked to increase risk of colon and other forms of cancer. But also farm salmon lacks vitamin D, and it's also in many cases it's manufactured and it's stored with a lot of carcinogenic chemicals like PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls, flame retardants, pesticides, and antibiotics, just to make sure that the meat sort of stays, I'm not going to say fresh, but it stays stable over long periods of time. People have heard for many years about hot dogs and bacon and all these other processed meats, and they're high in nitrates, etc. And they're cooked over the open flame, and that in and of itself may actually increase your risk of getting cancer as well. But in terms of the presentation tonight, I think what you need to get, the key thing here is if you're going to buy salmon, which was a tremendous cut of meat, I love to eat it myself, is to make sure it's locally grown or locally fished, and that it's as organic as possible. I know that there are other types of things in terms of pesticides and mercury compounds that might be in salmon, but for the most part, if you're buying a cut of meat that's locally farmed and is as organic as possible, you may bypass some of the issues with what I'll call the big factory farmed pieces of fish, and also the processed meats. I don't eat much processed meat at all, mostly because I don't like the taste. And secondly, I know that these things are very high in fat, preservatives, pesticides, and chemicals, so it kind of makes them less appealing to me. Well, what's next here? As I was just mentioning, choosing locally grown and organic foods. I've said this in other episodes, I'll say it tonight, and I'll say it in other episodes in the future. We're very fortunate to live here in Santa Barbara, where we have many types of organic markets. We have them in Montecito, we have them a couple days here in Santa Barbara, we have them out in Goleta. And of course, organically grown food, although it might be more expensive, really is a better buy in the long run, just in terms of both flavor and texture of food and the amount of chemicals that you might not be getting in the organically grown food versus things that you would buy in the general store. So as often as possible, as often as your budget allows, choose organic foods, especially from the meats and the vegetables. I think it's very important. Well, what's next here? Eat living foods. Does that mean that you have to cook your chicken while it's still alive? No, it does not. But one example of a living food is sprouts. And sprouts are things that you can eat by themselves. You can put them in salads. You can mix them in different types of casseroles. And they're actually a live food. They're a plant food. They're still sort of growing while you're eating them. And they're loaded with vitamins and minerals. They're reasonably inexpensive to buy. And they're actually not that bad. They're pretty tasty to eat. So if you're interested in having sprouts as part of your salad, that is a very good organic sort of live food choice that you can have that's going to pack on the nutrients as well as not giving you any of the issues with eating foods that have been in storage for a long time. We actually spoke about that in our last episode with regards to the book Tomato Land, where they had picked the tomatoes months and months before they were even ripe. Foods like sprouts are a superfood. They're considered very, very high nutrient density. And so I'm making those as a recommendation in terms of your cancer prevention diet. So let's look at our next one. This is an interesting, about 70% of the cookware that's sold in the United States contains what's called a perfluorinated compounds, or PFCs. And these are used to make sure that the bottom of the pan is non-stick. And as I said, most of the pans that are manufactured overseas and shipped to the United States that are purchased have these PFCs as part of their coating. So this coating has been shown over many years to actually increase the risk for cancers because of the cooking at high temperatures. So if you can cook with stainless steel pans or metal pans and not worry about the non-stick coating, I think that you can actually reduce your cancer risk at home every time that you cook something, whether it's eggs, whether it's anything that you cook in the pan. You can reduce your risk of cancer by not using a non-stick surface. You're going to eliminate those PFCs, and you're going to reduce your risk for cancer prevention. So let's look at the next one. This is one of my favorites. I actually spoke about this in our last episode, and I'll probably talk about it in many episodes, and it's optimizing your vitamin D levels. If you want to decrease your risk of cancer about as well as anything, you want to optimize your vitamin D, especially vitamin D3. There are studies from over 100 countries right now that say very conclusively that whether you're taking a vitamin D supplement, or especially living here in California in the southern United States, is the exposure of about 20 to 45 minutes of sunshine a day, you're going to increase your vitamin D, which is probably one of the best, if not the best way to reduce your cancer risk for most types of cancer over the course of a day. And that's probably the easiest thing to do. So I'm not telling you to go out and buy all new cookware. If you can increase your levels of vitamin D, that may be as good as anything else that you can do. And of course, standing around in sunshine whenever you can is one of the cheapest and easiest things that you can do to increase that vitamin D content. Well, let's look at the other thing here. This is a very important aspect of cancer prevention that most people never think about. And I want you to imagine yourself in the grocery store and you're shopping and you need to get cleaner for the floor, you need to get soap for the dishwasher, you need to get shampoos, and you need to get all of these other cleaning products for your car and all this other stuff. But what most people don't really understand is that some of the highest risk for getting cancer is by long-term exposure to these types of chemicals, which are actually sitting right under your sink in your kitchen. They're out in your garage. Some of them may be actually next to your food storage, etc. So I'm not going to list all of the types of cleaning agents because I have to tell you that there are over 800,000 chemical agents right now that are listed in the OSHA manual. Those are used in businesses, corporations, manufacturing, etc. But a lot of these serious chemicals are right in your house. And of course, most people use bleach and they don't really understand what a very toxic chemical it is. You're not supposed to breathe it. You're not supposed to get it on your skin, let alone having it splash in your eye. It's very dangerous. It needs to be tended to immediately. So what I'd like to do tonight in terms of simplifying your cleaning products needs is to recommend a couple products that I've used for a number of years that I think are probably some of the best things that you can use. Two of my favorites are listed right here on the screen. And the first one is Dr. Bronner's soap. It's been around for probably 75 years. It can be used any type of cleaning. You can use it as a personal hygiene soap. Instead of using a bar of soap, you can actually use Dr. Bronner's. I cut it with water. I squeeze it right out of the tube. I use it as part of my own personal cleaning soap. I think it smells terrific. It comes in a number of different scents, peppermint, lavender, etc., etc. And the second one is Murphy's oil soap. So if you're using 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 different types of home cleaning products and you want to simplify, Murphy's oil soap can be used for almost anything. You can clean your car, you can clean your car rims, you can clean most areas in the house, the tub, the sinks, the floors, the countertops, etc. You can clean walls. I don't think you can clean windows, but you can clean almost anything in the house with the Dr. Bronner's soap. It is absolutely amazing. Now, the Dr. Bronner's and the Murphy's oil soap are soaps, so they do leave a film. So if you're cleaning something like your car or other objects, you want to make sure that you do wash it fairly well with water to sort of, get the film off. But outside of the film, they're organic products. They've been around for 75 to 100 years. They have virtually no side effects at all. You can have both of those on your skin for very long periods of time, and they're not going to cause any problems. So I highly recommend those products. Check them out at your store. See if those are something that you'd like to use at your house. And while we're on products, my next slide is really talking about green beauty products. You remember one of our former shows, we had Betty Duncan on the show, and Betty was talking about skincare products. And during the show, she mentioned that there were over 32,000 products that are on the market worldwide in terms of skincare. And many of these products have toxic chemicals in them, both just as to sort of make the skin glow more or to preserve the product for its shelf life. Well, if we're using greener products, we're using something that is still good for the skin, but something that's not going to absorb into the skin with any types of toxic chemicals. So the internet's a wonderful thing. I'm not going to recommend a specific product tonight because I know that Betty spent quite a bit of time on 2 or 3 products in our last show. But what I'd like to do is have you recognize the fact that skincare products do absorb into the skin almost immediately. And whether they're a lipstick or a skin or a facial, they're going to absorb into the skin. So if you can get a product that is organic and does not have any chemicals in it, you're going to help reduce your risk of cancer. Remember that in the last show we said that the skin is the largest organ in the body, so the more of those types of skincare products that you use, the more of a risk that you may pose in terms of getting cancer in the future. All right, our next slide here is what's probably the most important thing that you can think about. Our bodies are mostly water. We need to have water every day. So this slide is telling us to drink pure water. There are many types of products that are added to water right now, and I'm going to read some of them. The trihalomethanes, these are some of the most common forms of disinfectant byproducts. They're actually a cancer group B carcinogen, which means that they've been shown to cause cancer in laboratory animals. So whether it's chlorine or bromine or any of the other types of additives that are put into water to kill funguses and other types of things, chloride, which is a chlorine, and bromides are themselves toxic chemicals. So in your house, if you're buying a new house or you're renting, you might want to ask the owners, do you use a filtration system? Whether it's just a general water filter, or in the case of my house, we have what's called a reverse osmosis or an RO system, which means that it takes the chemicals out by virtue of their molecular structure. And that's a guarantee that you're going to get a very high level of clean water for drinking and cooking, as opposed to just drinking out of the tap. Water is a very important topic in terms of cancer prevention. We will probably have an entire show on that here soon because there's so much information about water that people just need to know. Well, let's look at a pretty interesting area in terms of food supply. This slide is asking you, the viewer, to avoid most types of canned foods. Well, it's very interesting because since World War II, many of our food products now come in cans. But if you use cans, most of the metal these days has a product called bisphenol A, which is called BPA. It's an endocrine disrupting chemical that's linked to cancer of the reproductive and fetal development. And many cans and packaging elements have these BPA elements in them. So I guess there's 2 things that we can do here. If we buy a can, we might want to ask the shop owner, hey, does this can have BPA as part of the inside residue of the can? and they may actually use a canned product that does not. One store that I'm thinking here in the Santa Barbara area is the Isla Vista Food Co-op, and I do believe that the cans that they use do not have BPA as part of the inside lining of the can. So you might want to ask, is this BPA free? Or I guess the other issue here is to try to buy as little food products in cans as possible. That way you're going to be avoiding your risk in terms of BPA and other types of toxic chemicals that are used just in the storage of those types of food products. Well, here's our next slide. Avoid genetically modified organisms or genetically modified foods. I'm not going to say a lot about this except one thing. There was a study that was done in Great Britain. The results were published a few months ago. The study was very conclusive that the animals who were fed GMO corn over their lifetimes developed tumors all over their bodies. And a follow-up study to that actually has shown that those mice actually died prematurely. Now, we're going to have an entire show coming up very soon about the genetically modified organism question. It's very important. It's really coming to a threshold in the United States. Over a dozen countries in Europe have now banned GMO crops from being planted. In the U.S. right now there's referendums. We had an anti-GMO referendum here in the fall. It did not pass, but it did not pass by very much. My instinct tells me that if we have one in the next election, we may have a different outcome. But the gist of this slide and the gist of why I want to talk about it and introduce the concept of GMOs, because there are still people who don't really know what they are and what kinds of foods they're actually in and what the consequences are. I want to introduce it as part of this cancer prevention lecture, but I also want to sort of rev you up in terms of, hey, we're going to be talking about it down the road. So let's look at the next slide here. This is interesting. Since the 1950s, most houses in the United States have come with a microwave. And most people have heated up everything from their day-old pizzas to their 2-hour coffee in the microwave. But microwaves create compounds in the heating process called radiolytic compounds. And this comes from things like putting the styrofoam over the container and putting the food in there and having it heat up. Now these radiolytic compounds, we're not exactly sure that they may cause cancer, but we're not sure that they don't cause cancer. Microwaves in and of themselves may have an increase in cancer risk. So if you have a microwave in your house and you use it maybe once a week, that's probably the best course of action. I would say that people who are using the microwave 2, 3, 4 times a day may unwillingly know that they're increasing their risk for cancer, not just from the microwaves, but the way that if they're covering some of these foods, they may be increasing the amount of these radiolytic compounds that are in the foods after they come out of the microwave. Well, let's look at our next one here. This is also interesting because we are in the Wi-Fi age, and of course you're looking at a slide that's on a computer, and that computer I look at every day is plugged into a Wi-Fi. But if you limit your exposure to information carrying radio waves, whether it's cell phone towers, Wi-Fi stations, etc., if you can limit the amount of Wi-Fi and radio waves that you're exposed to, the better. Okay? We don't listen to radio as much as we used to, but there are still a lot of radio waves in the atmosphere. What most people, I think, need to be concerned with these days is the waves that are produced from cell phones and from Wi-Fi receivers. So I know that there are a lot of people are saying, hey, wear a Bluetooth or wear some sort of a ear extension so you don't have the cell phone right up alongside of your head. There are some really interesting research studies that are coming out in terms of the changes in the brain of people who have spent so much time with a cell phone alongside of their head, but also things like being in a Wi-Fi station, being in a cafe or something where you're exposed to not just your own computer, but many computers around you. So I guess the gist of what I say here in terms of limit these radio wave exposures is pay attention to how long you're on the computer during the course of a day and how close you are to the computer screen, because that will also play a part in your exposure to those types of radio waves. Okay, one of the last slides that I have on here is to learn relaxation techniques. which is going to be the topic of another episode here on Medhealthfit. But the reason that I put this in here is because there are a couple techniques that are sort of new to the marketplace. One of them is called the EFT, the Emotional Freedom Technique, and the other one is called German New Medicine. And these types of relaxation programs are really designed to get people to first, understand what kind of stress their body is under in the first place. And secondly, on a daily basis, what kind of tools can they enact to really help themselves to relax more, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's mind visualization, whether it's lying down and relaxing a certain time of the day, to reduce the stress hormones, because it's really the increase in stress hormones such as cortisol, which may actually be doing damage to the body over time. So the big question is, in terms of whatever relaxation program that you're doing, you have to do it every day, and you have to see if there are any types of results. Your heart rate gets lower, you reduce your blood pressure, your breathing rate gets lower and lower, and you just feel better. You feel more relaxed during the course of a day. So this is our last slide here is probably one of the most important things, because this is something we all have to do at the end of the day, is to get good sleep. And you may need 6 hours of sleep a night. You may need 8.5 or 9 hours of sleep. The key is to get quality sleep, to try to get to sleep as fast as you can, and to get into REM sleep every night. Now, we're not paying attention to REM sleep. We just hope that we have it. But how do you know that you have good sleep? Well, because you wake up the next morning and you feel pretty good. If you don't feel pretty good, ask yourself, did I wake up 2 or 3 times last night? How am I doing? So you have to kind of pay attention to how much sleep you're getting, the quality of the sleep that you're getting. And if not, you may want to have some sort of a technique like a relaxation tape to help you a couple nights a week. So in conclusion, cancer prevention is not early detection. Cancer prevention is doing techniques on a daily basis that will help you, and from the standpoint of this lecture, things that you can practice every day, both changing things in your house and changing things about yourself that can help you prevent the odds, increasing the odds of getting cancer on a daily basis. And over the course of your lifetime, that increase or that decrease in the risk may turn out to be a life-saving endeavor. So that's this show, and this is the first of a number of different talks about cancer. And hopefully, if you have any questions, you can send an email, which we'll have on the screen here at the end. I hope you liked this lecture, because I hope there were some really interesting cancer prevention tips in here. So for this edition of Medhealthfit, I'm Eric Durack, and we'll see you next time.